Well, hello, America, and welcome back to Stars and Stripes, your podcast for understanding what's happening in today's military with DEI, CRT, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and critical race theory. These are sort of corrosive efforts that have been made to destroy some of what's important in our country, our readiness and our ability to fight wars and defend our nation. But it may run much deeper than that in a general sense. There's a lot of confusion and doubt today about some of the things that are happening in our country that are kind of confusing to people. And we're here today to talk about that underlying effort. With me is a very special guest today, somebody who's actually lived through some of this kind of problem with ideology in the past. Alexander Markovsky is a Soviet immigrant. He holds degrees in economics and political science from the University of Marxism and Leninism, and a graduate degree in structural engineering from Moscow University. He grew up the son of a Communist Party member, and a very high one at that. But he escaped and managed to get back into the West because he wanted to see a little different view of how the world works. He currently resides in Houston, Texas, and he's an engineer, and he has a consulting company that specializes in managing large international projects. He's also written a couple of books, and he's also published over 300 articles about the effects of Marxism, Bolshevism, socialism, communism. And it's a real pleasure to have him here today because he's going to answer some questions, I think, for us about where the Soviet Union was, where Marxism was, and where it is today, and the effects. So Alexander Markovsky, sir, it's great having you with us today as our guest on Stars and Stripes.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
So Alex, if you will, you might just, for our audience's benefit, fill us in a little bit about how you grew up as a part of the Soviet Union and then the effect that your father had on your life. It's a fascinating story.
Well, I was born, raised, and educated in the Soviet Union. My father was a manager of a big construction company, a state construction company, of course. And at the same time, he was a high-ranking member of a local Communist Party. Although he had been a communist, he didn't like that system. However, you have to provide for your family and protect your family, and that was the way he had been doing it. One episode I'd like to emphasize. One day he told me that I have to venture into University of Marxism, Leninism, and study political relations and economics. So I knew my father's views about the Soviets, and I asked him, listen, Dad, why do you have to learn this crap? And he said something that really embedded in my thinking forever. He said, in order to survive, you have to understand the philosophy of your enemies. I wish he looking at me from above and see how that really worked for me, how it helped me to survive and achieve my goals. When I tried to leave the Soviet Union, it was the year of 1967. And eventually it took 8 years me to get out of the country because I understood the philosophy of my enemies. I never been incarcerated. they allow me to finish my studies. When I got a job, I could work there to the last day. When I got finally they got permission to leave. Unlike my friends who try to fight their way out, many of them, very unfortunately, been prosecuted, incarcerated. Some end up in psychiatric clinics.
Hmm.
Uh, because you see, you set up your goals and you think how to achieve them, not to deviate into something perhaps what looks more important, like fighting the Soviets, fighting your way out, but surely, slowly and surely move forward with what your toward your objectives, and that worked very well for me.
So your father obviously helped you do that because of his position in the party. Is that correct?
Well, you know, to very little extent, be honest with you, not in a way to help me to get out, but in a way to understand whom I'm dealing with and
Ah,
and how to do it. He told me, he said, "You're trying to fight them, and they will crush you. It's nothing for them to do it. You just think what your objective is. Don't deviate from it, and understand whom you're dealing with." And I tell you that worked like a charm.
oh yes, yeah. Well, that does, and I'm delighted that you were able to get out the way that you did,
Yeah.
because you ended up having a very successful career, and you've written about that extensively. So while you were there, though, you became a son of Marxism, socialism, communism, and you got to see that up close. But in our country, we don't see those things sometimes the same way. So help our audience understand a little bit about how that developed and what socialism really is.
Well, I'd love to do it. What we have to understand that unlike slavery, feudalism, capitalism, that were product of a natural evolution of society, uh, and that evolution was precipitated by the rise in labor productivity. Socialism is artificial social order, and as such, it needs to be built. Since it needs to be built, it necessitates enforcement. Since
Hmm.
socialism cannot be implemented without enforcement, its very nature is contradictory to freedom. Our problem in America is that the contemporary political thinking of American people is more backward than that of Russians or Chinese who has experienced it. And too many of them living in what I would call flat Earth universe that know nothing. And
Uh-huh.
unfortunately, neither education, nor upbringing, nor life experience prepares American for grasping the veracity of change. You remember that Barack Obama used it. And understand what is in fact tyranny. I know the
Well,
proponents of that system, of this new order, may say that yes, may have some tyranny, but it is for common good. And that what really raised my blood pressure. Because of course, yes, it is. So the French Revolution. So there was Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. There was a cultural revolution in China. So so the man-made Great Famine in the Soviet Union, and so extermination of Jews in Germany. Yes, it was so for common good, right?
Yes.
and millions and tens of millions and maybe even hundreds of millions of people will perish for the idea that was common good, right? So when
Yes.
institution of tyranny is not restrained, the tyranny does not dissipate. It intensifies. It ultimately employs violence to sustain itself. And there is no limit to the violence perpetuated for the common good or fairness. In this
So
country, we
the
have experienced politically motivated trials, massive government regulations restraining our freedom, and even attempted assassinations of political opponents.
so
So
wasn't
it
that wasn't that the promise though of the Bolsheviks, Lenin in 1918, when they moved in and took over, actually seized the government, right? And it was for the people, right? Bolshevism for the
absolutely,
people, and that was the
absolutely,
promise. We're here to take over from those nasty czar regulations and things. We're here to free you, and we're here to do good. But in fact, is there good that ends up being done in the end? And isn't that what's kind
yes.
of going on?
You remember those beautiful Bolshevik slogans: "Land to peasants, bread to
Yep,
Hungary, peace to
yep,
people." How that work? Okay,
yep,
they say, yeah, bread to hungry resulted in famine. Peace to people resulted in civil war, revolution and civil war that 15 million people perished.
yep.
So uh, that's how it works. It's a very big lie, but looks very appealing to the masses.
So,
Promises
so that was
very appealing.
a bit about moving forward with change, hope and change. Have we heard
Right,
where
right.
that exists?
Things. Yeah, when they say now it's different, but just as you pointed out, maybe slogans a little bit different, but the
Yeah.
purpose is the same.
But what you're left with is sort of an empty promise of we're here to help. We know you're in trouble. We're here to be the salvation for you. Well, all you have to do is change your form of governance and the way you
Yeah.
live, and things will be fine. Utopia, I guess. But so far, has utopia actually worked under socialism anywhere?
Well, we know it hasn't worked thus far, but what we hear every time we hear it, now it's different. Uh, yeah, we are not uh, uh, grisly gangs of murders. We are not Bolsheviks. We are not grisly gang of murders. We're not gonna. Uh, you're not gonna see mass executions. You're not gonna see concentration camps. We will see beautiful life in economic equality. And here I want to get to Marxism, that as you know, the political philosophy that promotes egalitarianism, which is a theory of economic equality. And
Yeah,
that
and
socialism is economic system based on Marxism. It is
so Marx,
usually, yeah, I'm listening.
so 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 Marx had the view about capitalism, and he actually said, actually, capitalism ain't so bad. It kind of does work, but he just wanted to do away with it, right?
Right, we want to establish fairness. We want to do economic equality. You can hear it all the time. That is a song that communist, socialist, and now our Democratic Party is trying to promote. And and it's interesting, by the way, that Lenin, their slogans are very popular, and policies that they try to promote very appealing. You remember
Uh-huh.
how Lenin defined socialism? He said, uh, it organized on principle from each according to his ability to each according to his contribution or work, whatever. But that was not enough. They promise you a real paradise on this side of the grave. They say, and next stage, next phase of socialism will be communism, which is defined as from each according to his ability and to each according to his needs. That is very appealing idea because those ideas, those illusory ideas, I would say, of economic equality and society when people of limited abilities can get according to their unlimited needs really transcend time and appeals to people of all colors, all races. So you have to understand that that is very powerful ideas. Whether they true
Yeah.
or not, nobody cares. It's like a religion, except you're getting everything, as I said, on this side of the grave.
Well, so, but in order for socialism to succeed, actually, Marxism is even worse. If you're depending on just the ability to convince people that things are going to get better, reality kind of comes into focus there too. And the old Soviet Union, especially right after the Czar, an agrarian society, which was a little behind, way behind the power curve on industrialization and technology, if you will. And also, because of that, they weren't able to produce wealth the same way the Western world was, and they were fighting a war at the same time. Those are the worst conditions that you can have if you're not busy creating the ability to fund it through revenue, through wealth building. So all you're doing is just rearranging the decks on the Titanic. You're not producing anything.
That was the whole idea, and you touched very interesting subject that I'd like to elaborate on it
Please
because
do.
since the publication of Marx Capital, what was about 160 years ago, Marxist socialists and their followers have overlooked a fundamental contradiction. Equality in wealth is an oxymoron.
Yeah.
True economic equality can exist only in poverty. Wealth, by its nature, cannot be equal. Thus, Marxism is not the philosophy of shared prosperity, it's enforced poverty. To be short, Marxism is a philosophy of poverty. So
Yeah.
wars, destruction, and every famine and everything that leads to poverty, and leads to economic equality as they understand it.
And conversely, if you have the ability to create wealth through individual labor and success, you've got an incentive for people to continue to do it. You don't have an incentive, it seems to me, when things fail, like either in Cuba or North Korea, where there's immense poverty and actually starvation and regimentation that's extreme. How does that make you feel happy about going to work every day?
Well, I'm sure you have the answer. Well,
I wish I did.
yeah. Well,
Well, at least
but
for me.
nevertheless, with everything you just point out, you know, it is very difficult to fight an idea that instead of working hard, as you just point out, why it is easy just to take it from, let's say, Alex Markovsky or Donald Trump. Why don't we take his wealth and divide it between all of us? Isn't it much easier way to do it? But I tell you what, if the supporter of that economic equality included Marxist graduates of American universities, absorb human history, they would realize that the only historical datum that points to economic equality goes back to the era of primitive communism. About what, 10,000 years ago, before farming, people were forced to
Yep.
obtain food collectively. Everything that was produced was consumed. There was no wealth created, and it was resulted in total economic equality, in absolute poverty.
Yep.
Ironically, that's how economic equality can be achieved. Because, as we said earlier, economic equality and wealth are mutually exclusive. But of course, as soon as people got into agriculture and invented fences, well, they start producing surplus, engage in commerce, and subsequently start building some wealth. And inequality was born
Yep.
because some work
Well, but
harder. Yes.
yes,
Some work
and
harder,
there's
some had better land, some invented fertilizer, and then on and on and on.
but as long as there's opportunity for people to rise from being in poverty and maybe not being so prosperous through their own labor, through their own efforts, if they can succeed, then they can change that paradigm.
Well, they changed the paradigm, but you created wealth inequality, correct?
Yeah. But again, as you
And
say, necessary for people to want to do better.
well, but people who don't do better is a majority,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Well, that's
Not
well.
everybody
So
become Elon Musk or Steve Jobs
yeah.
because I'll get to it perhaps later a little bit, but God did not create us all equal.
But as we were talking about earlier, because like in the old Soviet Union, because it was stagnant, being more agricultural rather than industrial, where they were creating new products, new services, new wealth. Because of that, it just sort of stayed the same. And we can't allow that to happen to us, can we?
I certainly hope so, but it's not that simple. Again, I said successful people are in minority,
Yep. Well, as you would expect, because not everybody can do it. So
and
let me ask another question here. So what was Marx's role in changing socialism into pure Marxism as it exists today?
well, I would go back to collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. That
Uh,
was hailed as especially in the United States, as a victory for freedom, triumph of democracy over totalitarianism. But I think the jubilation was premature, however. The ideas of Marx and Lenin did not die. They just, and demise of socialism was not irrevocable. It's like
mhm.
a deadly bacteria that mutates to become resilient to antibiotics. Marx is adopting a new reality, and in one of the most dramatic reversal of history, comfortably relocated to the United States, where it's acquired a new life and malignancy within the Democratic Party. And in 2008, this revolutionary ferment culminated in the election of Barack Obama, the architect of new, I would say, benevolent form of Marxism. it was designed to separate Democrats, was, as I told earlier, from grisly gang of Russian Bolshevik terrorists and mass murderers, and offer a new imaginative path to socialism in the United States. I personally believe that Barack Obama is a leading Marxist of our time. He is very intelligent, he is imaginative, and he, I would say, come up with a solution to install socialism without revolution, without murders, without
Uh-huh.
that mass terror. And now, when they say, hey, this time it's different, this time socialism is democratic, well, I would take it with a big grain of salt. And I wonder how it's different. And I knew that I expected you to ask me this question, and I even got some quotes that you might be interesting.
I know I would, but
So, what the definition of social democracy? Social democracy is a political ideology that has at its goal the establishment of socialism through the implementation of policy regime that includes, but not limited to, high taxation, government regulation of private enterprises, and the establishment of universal welfare state. So democratic socialism is not new version of socialism. It's just another method of establishing socialism.
yes, well, but even with Barack Obama and his administration when they came in, fundamentally changing, it was also about redistribution of wealth, which he made, a kind of an error, I think, when he was interviewing Joe the plumber during one of his campaign stops,
Yeah.
and he said, "Look, Joe, you're a small business guy. What do you want? This we're going to redistribute the wealth." That didn't go over very well, but it did kind of reveal something about maybe the existing plans of the socialists and others of ideologies and what they wanted to do. If you go back and even to the early 1960s, the Communist Party of the United States was very good about putting out a whole list of things that they wanted to do, which, if you look at it today, some of them are a little out of touch, but some are not. Gaining control of schools, gaining control of student newspapers, fomenting riots so that you could illustrate disaffection for the government, infiltrating the press, gaining control of the radio and TV and motion pictures, discrediting American culture by degrading history. These are just few of the over 50 goals that the communists actually put into the country. That's part of the congressional record, so that's not speculation. But those are the things that they were talking about then in 1963. So if you look at it that way and fast forward into current administrations, there's a lot of that that's now resident and still there, but maybe kind of under camouflage or concealed. How do you feel about that?
Well, they started it. Well, we might say that it's all started with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, those
Hmm.
socialist tendencies. But
Yeah.
over the time, it's progressed, and we can't just blame the Democrats. Republican Party was helping them, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and nevertheless, they went ahead and supported those ideas over the years. And we can discuss in length a little bit later. And I thought about that. I expected this kind of questioning. Uh,
Okay.
yes, you're absolutely correct. It started early, and over the years, you probably remember those red diapers babies. You remember that expression in the
I
United
do,
States?
yes.
When the whole generations, been educated and indoctrinated into uh, uh, socialist uh, ideas. It has happened, even you remember it was said that uh, indoctrination can be done with one generation. If you school people properly, and Lenin even once said, if you give me a child, a 6 years old child, I put seeds in his brain, they will not be rooted.
Well, that is one of
And
the keys is the game.
that's what's been done over the years.
Yeah. And that's the hidden part, perhaps, that it's hard for people to see sometimes if it's postulated as being helpful to the people, solving problems and all that, which if it happens is great. But when it doesn't happen, and there's another side of that that creates problems and hurts people, then that's a destructive kind of philosophy. And it seems that that's where Marx was headed, was tearing down and destroying things so you could build it up into what you wanted. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. That is very true.
So, so it was implemented in the United States then by, I think, had a lot to do in the 60s with the anti-war movement, getting into universities and college students, getting then into the media and the public, and creating a sense that the country was not good and there's something wrong with it. Let's change it. That's where some of the calls, I think, for change started early.
Yes, but he was very. If you're talking about Obama, he was very imaginative about it. I would
Uh-huh.
say he was an architect of this new strategy when he announced fundamental transformation of America. Uh, as an ardent Marxist who possesses a deeper understanding of Marxism than most of modern counterparts, Obama has changed fundamental principles of the ideology. We have to look at it from different perspective. Contrary to Marx, and he looked at a different perspective. Contrary to Karl Marx's dogma that transition to socialism must be accomplished through violent struggle by the organized working class, the proletariat, who Marx said
Mm-hmm.
nothing to lose but their chain. Obama recognized that the traditional proletarians no longer exist in the United States. Capitalism transformed them into bourgeoisie or middle class with home
Yes.
ownership, 2 cars in the garage, kids in the college, and all and all and all, that they have a lot to lose, unlike the proletarians that Karl Marx described. So Obama came up with imaginative solution to it. He confronted Karl Marx's postulate that the prime goal of socialism, abolition of private property, and concentration means of production in the hands of government, is wealth redistribution. Instead, Obama accepted Leon Trotsky's interpretation. In a country, Trotsky said, in a country where sole employer is the state, the the opposition means death by slow starvation. And he went even further. He said, the old communist principle, who doesn't work shall not eat, has been replaced with a new one, who does not obey shall not eat. So he concluded quite correctly, by the way, that as long as government controls the economy, it controls profits. Most
Yeah.
importantly, Obama concluded that to control the economy, the government must control only three vital sectors: healthcare, finance, and energy. So we don't need a revolution. We don't have to expropriate private property. We don't have
Yep.
to create mass murder. We can do it slowly. We can do it what appears to be peacefully. So by controlling profits, the government can gradually impose socialism. Hence, neither revolution, I said, nor expropriation is necessary. And
So
he
instead of
was quite
being
successful. Hmm?
so instead of being overt and in your face, it's kind of like slowly cooking the frog. You just keep
Right,
turning the
right,
temperature up a little bit
right.
over time.
Yes. So it's
But
the
but
same,
but
the
here,
same thing, except doing slowly.
so the frog doesn't know it's being cooked even, until
Right.
it's too late.
It seems too late,
So
and he's been successful in it. You remember Dodd-Frank and Affordable Care Acts successfully
yeah,
placed financial and health sector under government oversight. Similarly, you remember Kamala Harris proposed that called Medicare for all to
yes,
place that would place harness of government control on American people. Uh, they, so they, as I said, they needed three sectors of economy. So they got financial sector, they got uh, healthcare under control. What they couldn't get was energy. So they come up with this pseudo-scientific theory of global warming, cooling, or climate change, whatever is popular nowadays, you know, and to put regulations and suffocate the energy sector by regulations. Very creative, I have to say. Very
oh
creative.
yeah, absolutely. So those are just some of the institutions that have been co-opted and or taken over in some cases. The education system, energy now, but there were other parts, including the military and government, where you would say that would be the last place that you want to have something like an ideology take control. And that's where stars got into kind of this whole thing, was fighting the critical race theory implementation, which was unequal treatment, picking on outside things for people succeeding, which didn't involve meritocracy, and then getting into diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are terms that were used in the public, which I don't think people to this day fully still understand. So isn't that the way that communism, Marxism worked?
Worked in the United States. That's what they are doing it. And instead of a bloody revolution, they do it what I benevolent way. Just seems like we're peaceful, and you probably wouldn't even notice
Yeah.
what they were doing.
But but sooner or later, doesn't reality take over?
Well, it may, but it could be way too late.
I
And
mean,
it was
it's like spending other people's money, right? Sooner or later, you run out of that, and then you got
we
to
run
face the
around
reality.
that. So,
Yeah.
well, you just touched something interesting because although Obama, as I said, created a creative, imaginative way to install socialism, they still use Bolsheviks' methods from time to time to uh, uh, enforce their ideas. Because we know, we already talked about it, that socialism is artificial system and has to be enforced. But and so they gradually, as you just pointed out, gradually undermine existing institutions such as marriage, religion, the free market economy, the judicial system, and the principle of individual liberty, they depict them as outdated, unjust, and discriminatory.
Well, it's interesting you had mentioned those
They promote
particular things.
homosexuality, change traditional family values, uh, uh, aligning with Lenin assertion, destroy the family, you destroy the society. So,
Yeah, well,
so they
that's again,
actively dismantling established constitutional order.
yeah.
Oh, by the way, just remind me, they also extending the voting rights to non-citizens. Through open borders, millions of migrants have entered the United States with dubious past. And so
So
even
isn't
the
that
state
a
of California, I think they implement policies that automatically registered undocumented illegal individuals to vote when they obtain a driver license. So Democrats consistently oppose voter ID laws and efforts to clean voter rolls. So history has shown that the socialist movement was shown that with socialist movement, fraud is often used as a powerful tool in their political arsenal.
oh yes,
And they do
but
not
isn't but
neglect experience as Soviet Russian predecessor. Uh,
so as we've
I
been talking about, though, the efforts to infiltrate institutions, to destroy from inside, to change, to obfuscate, to hide things, to slowly, coercively get rid of parts of government and things. Those are things that have been tried in other countries. And has there been a place, again, we talked about this earlier, has there been a place where that's worked effectively? Taking all those institutions, changing them, making the governments maybe even go away and reform. Is that working somewhere?
well, when you say working, whether they succeed in doing it, yes, in Soviet Russia, yes,
Yep.
they did it. But what I failed to mention thus far, one of Bolsheviks' tools that is widely used in the United States and maybe one of the most destructive tools that they used. And I to prepare for you something what Lenin said, and you will see how it reflected in the United States. So
Good.
on April 22nd, 1919, on his 50th birthday, I don't know, maybe Lenin got a little bit more vodka than usual, but he told us something astonishing, how they destroyed wealth. He gave interview to London Daily Chronicle, and he said, and by the way, the next day interview was published in New York Times on the headline "Talk with the Bolshevik Head." And when I was writing my book, I went into library and I get that New York Times and read it from the New York Times. And that's what Lenin said. Experience has taught us that it is impossible to root out the evil of capitalism merely by confiscation and expropriation. For however ruthlessly such measure may be applied, astute speculators and survivors of capitalist classes will always manage to evade them and continue to corrupt the life of the community, he said. So, to accomplish this, Lenin declared, debauch the currency to overturn the basis of society. The destruction of currency was the main component of Bolshevik strategy. So during the
Yeah.
interview, he went even further and elaborated on implication of this strategy. He said hundreds of thousands of rubles were being issued daily by our treasury. This is done not in order to fill the coffers of the state by practically worthless paper, but
Yep.
with the deliberate intention of destroying the value of money as means of payment. This simplest way to exterminate the very spirit of capitalism. Therefore, the flood of currency, which notes of high face value without financial guarantee of any sort, the great illusion of the value of power of money on which the capitalist state is based, will have been definitely destroyed.
So
So
what he was
then,
doing was
but
he was
isn't it
making it work.
strategies that we are experiencing in the last, I would say, let's say 30 or 40 years? You remember that since 1971, the national debt was rising from 700 billion to an astonishing, I don't know, what, 35, 36 trillion today. And it was
Yeah.
done beautifully and with participation of the Republicans.
By spending so much.
So we are
So
destroying our currency exactly by playing Lenin's script.
and what he did was he made it appear as if there was wealth and revenue being produced by just making more worthless paper.
Of course,
But
exactly.
it was deception, right?
Right, and eventually the system collapsed. That's
Yep.
what that was his intention. So he destroyed wealth, and that I
So
keep
do
saying
you,
that
yes,
socialism is not about wealth distribution; it's about wealth destruction. Because the only way you can achieve economic equality in poverty.
yeah, because that's all you got.
Yeah,
So do you see pieces of that in our society today?
but
Is that
that's
active?
exactly what I point out, right? We raised the debt, from 700 billion to 35 trillion. And
Yeah.
you know
Well,
how
and there's also
inflation.
yeah, and there's
in-
also talk, today about doing away with fascists and then focus on oligarchy. How about that one?
yes, exactly. Yes,
Yeah,
but it's not
create a book.
all. But it's not all. The destruction of currency is a one piece, but we are dealing with multifaceted strategy that also include, let's say, judicial system.
Uh-huh.
It's a tool of
So,
intimidation, targeting, imprisoning political opponents, uh, in the line with what Lenin used to say. We can have two parties, Lenin said. We can have two parties. One in power, the other in jail. And we remember prosecution of 6,000 people who participated in a protest and what in January, what was it?
January 6th, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, but how about malicious prosecution of Donald Trump?
Well, that's part of an effort if you were going to try to overthrow or dismantle a government, that's the way you would do it. And the Communist Party has been very open about trying to do exactly that. Discredit the founding fathers, destroy the Constitution, uh, replace government with autocracy, and make it so difficult for people to live that you're constantly going through hoops trying to get things done. And it's just a burdensome way of doing it. That's how all these regulations, it seems, showed up during the last decade or so. And that's what now the effort is. eliminate those, get rid of big government, get rid of the regulations, restore the objectivity and if you will, the legal blindness of justice so that there's no interference that way either. But these are huge things that exist. And Alex, I'm disturbed that the general public doesn't see enough of this to understand the threat that exists today.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I will tell you go even further. I would say that in the last 30 years, Russia and America reversed places regarding Marxism. While Russia has ended its love affair with socialism and Marxism, the United States contracted this infectious disease. The, I bet you that communist leader ranging from Lenin to Brezhnev are watching this from the what they call great beyond with sardonic smile. What
Yep.
Soviet Union could not achieve through its formidable military and nuclear capabilities is now being realized by duly elected American presidents and legislature backed by the American electorate. It's crazy,
Well,
but
I
you
remember
see, it
I remember
works.
reading I remember reading that Lenin, when he actually succeeded in installing the Bolsheviks after the interim government that followed the Tsar, when he came from Europe just to do that, I don't think he was expecting that to be so successful. In fact, he even said that. He was amazed at how quickly and successfully they were able to take over the government. It happened almost overnight.
Right, right. It was very successful revolution in 1917. Very
And it
successful.
lasted for quite a while, but then didn't it also disintegrate almost in days?
Disintegrate what?
The Soviet Union didn't it kind of
Oh,
disintegrate?
well, that's 91. Yes, it's collapsed absolutely unexpectedly and extremely fast. Just as
Yep.
you
And
said, within days.
the survival depends on the forces that were forming it to keep doing what they're doing without any possibility of change. Once that change starts in someplace, then it's kind of curtains, I guess. So is that the answer maybe in our Western society? Is to find ways to make sure that reality bites, that people are looking at what's real, not what's imaginary or utopian?
Well, it's a part of it is education,
Yes.
which I would say in this country becomes absolutely deplorable. And that, of course, helps uh, uh, communists, socialists, whatever, helps them to undermine. And I
Well,
would
and I
say so
absolutely,
far quite successfully.
and that's part of it is restoring the appreciation for a free society that's based on individualism, using your own labor to get ahead, to be successful, and then not being burdened by everybody else's needs. I talked the other day about a parallel in our history that occurred when our country was being formed at Jamestown. They put together collectives to make wheat and farm products so that all of the people could survive the winter and they would have enough to succeed. They'd all put their stuff in the big warehouse and then they'd all distribute it, during the year when it got cold. Problem was not everybody was producing and not everybody was supporting that effort. So it kind of fell apart because of that. So the collective depends on enforcement of everybody having a certain part of that. Uh, was that not kind of what was going on in the old collectives of the Soviet Union?
Yes, that's what we discussed earlier. That system is unnatural and requires enforcement. Otherwise,
Yep.
it wouldn't work.
So is that what
Eventually
we're,
it didn't work even with enforcement, but for a while it does work.
so the antidote seems to be the focus on reality, productivity, wealth generation as an incentive for people to live better. And some of that focuses around economics, some of it around religion, some of it around philosophy, but in a way that produces something that's good for the society. And as I look at, the products of Marxism and Leninism and Bolshevism, all the isms is that they were designed for destruction and dismantling and rebuilding something that was uncertain.
Well, what you just said probably basically the freedom is a driving force of wealth creation, and you know, so any suppression of freedom result in the diminishing of wealth creation.
Yep.
That's
Well,
that's exactly what the purpose of Marxism, to make us all equal, and making us all equal. We already said it a number of times that it can be done only in poverty.
well. So I think that we struck on perhaps the value of talking with you today, and that is for people to understand that there is a way forward. Not to use that word as was done collectively by the Soviets, but there is a way to solve the problem of where we are, that we're starting to get forces that are fighting against us being prosperous and good people. That seems to be, in the end, the solution, I would think. But that's a lot of hard work, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it does. Yes, it does.
And so that's why we're
Yes,
here today to talk about this. And I'm grateful, Alex, for you helping with understanding that, particularly from your perspective as having grown up with that. We're going to pursue some more of this in future episodes of Stars and Stripes. We're going to have some panel discussions and some deeper dives, if you will, on what's happened, what can change, somewhat from the perspective of our role, which is to make our military and our government more successful, and particularly the warfighter in being able to fight off all these elements that come to exist. But that's coming up for our audience in future episodes. And Alex, I'm grateful to you, sir, for being a part of our discussion today. And I'm looking forward to deepen our dive into this for future episodes.
well, I'm very proud to be part of your efforts, and thank you for inviting me.
Alex, thank you. And so for our audience, stay tuned. There's more to come. And I would just mention that we're not a political organization. We don't have candidates. We don't have perspectives for elections. But what we do is like to discuss history and the way the world is today. And our big motto around here is reality bites. It's easy to have fantasies and big ideas, but you still have to deal with the reality of life. And that's kind of what we're here to discuss. So, Alex, thank you. And to our audience, we'll see
Thank
you
you.
next time around.